The dentist's office smelled faintly of antiseptic and mint, the kind of cold, sharp scent that always made me uneasy. I sat in the waiting room with my small purse clutched tightly in my lap, watching the receptionist flip through papers with a perfectly indifferent smile. My name had been called and I was waiting to be taken in, but Daniel, my son, stood at the counter with the dentist, his voice just low enough to pretend it was private, just loud enough to make sure I heard every word. Please subscribe to our channel and tell us in comments from where are you watching this video. She doesn't need anything major, he said, leaning on the desk, his tone dripping with annoyance. Don't waste good treatment on her teeth. She's almost gone anyway. The receptionist blinked, startled. The dentist frowned, shifting uncomfortably. And me? I froze. My heart stuttered in my chest as the words sank in, heavy and cruel. She's almost gone anyway. That was my son, my flesh and blood, reducing me to an expiration date in front of strangers. I kept my face still, staring at the floor tiles as if they held me together. My fingers twisted into the fabric of my skirt. Behind me, 2 other patients exchanged glances, one of them whispering to the other. Heat crawled up my neck. I wished the ground would swallow me whole. Daniel turned, catching my eye as if daring me to respond. His smirk was small, satisfied, like he had finally spoken the truth he'd been holding back for years. He sauntered toward me, hands in his pockets. Don't worry, Mom, he said, voice sugar-coated for the watching room. We'll get you patched up enough to last. Nothing fancy, though. No point spending money where it doesn't matter. The other patients didn't laugh. They looked away, embarrassed for me, but not enough to defend me. I swallowed hard, my chest tight, and followed the nurse when she called me back. The exam chair felt colder than usual, the bright light glaring in my eyes as the dentist gently worked. Don't mind him, he murmured, almost apologetic. Children don't always know how to choose their words. But I knew Daniel's words weren't careless. They were deliberate. He wanted to humiliate me. He wanted me to feel small, useless, disposable, even here, in a place meant to preserve what little health I had left. When the procedure was finished, Daniel paid with a sigh, slapping his card onto the counter as though every dollar was a wound. He grumbled loud enough for the room to hear. She should be grateful I even brought her. Most people would have left her to rot. Evelyn's laugh, his wife, perched elegantly in a chair scrolling her phone, rang out sharp and cruel. I walked out of that office with my head bowed, but inside, something had cracked open. It wasn't just pain anymore. It was fire. I thought of every meal I'd skipped to feed him when he was a boy, every coat I'd patched so he wouldn't feel ashamed at school, every sleepless night I spent working overtime to keep a roof above his head. And here he was, sneering that I was almost gone. He thought my time was nearly over. He thought he had already buried me with his words, but he didn't know the truth. He didn't know what I still held, what power was still mine to give or take. I walked beside him silently to the car, his laughter with Evelyn cutting through the air like knives, but my hands, folded neatly in my lap, trembled not with fear anymore, but with resolve. At the dentist's office, my son said, "Don't waste good treatment on her teeth. She's almost gone." He had no idea then that I was still strong enough to take everything he loved. Daniel drove us home from the dentist as if nothing had happened, his hand lazily draped over the steering wheel while Evelyn scrolled on her phone beside him, laughing at messages I knew weren't about me but felt like they were. The radio hummed, a cheerful tune that clashed violently with the heaviness in my chest. I sat in the back seat, staring out the window, my mouth still aching from the treatment, but the sting inside me had nothing to do with drills or needles. It was his words, burning over and over in my ears. She's almost gone anyway. When we pulled into the driveway, he didn't wait for me to catch up. He and Evelyn were already out, already inside, leaving me to fumble with my purse and slowly climb the front steps. By the time I got in, they were in the kitchen, laughing over wine, their cruelty dissolving into casual conversation, as if they hadn't just carved me into pieces hours ago. I moved quietly to my room, but through the thin walls of this house I once owned, I could hear every word. You spoil her," Evelyn said, her voice laced with venom. "Dragging her to the dentist at her age? For what? She'll be gone soon, Daniel. You should be putting that money into our future, not patching up hers." Daniel chuckled. "I know. But if I didn't take her, she'd guilt me in front of people. This way, I look like the dutiful son. Makes me look good." Their laughter spilled down the hall. I sat on the edge of my bed, my fists trembling in my lap, and looked at the framed picture on my nightstand. Charles smiled back at me from a younger time, his eyes steady, his hand on my shoulder. He had warned me, hadn't he? He had said, "People show their true hearts when they think you're too old to fight back." I had ignored it, hoping my son would prove him wrong. That night, I lay awake long after their voices quieted, staring at the ceiling, my heart heavy but my mind sharper than it had been in years. Daniel thought he had already buried me with his words, but he didn't know the truth. He didn't know that every dollar in this house still flowed through me, that the house itself, despite his smug swagger, still bore my name on the deed. He didn't know the accounts he relied on to fund Evelyn's little shopping sprees, and their weekend trips had never been his to begin with. He didn't know because I never told him. The next morning, Evelyn burst into my room without knocking, a mug of coffee in her hand. She set it down with a loud clink. "Here," she said, her smile tight. "Figured you'd want this before you start dragging around the house. Don't spill it on the carpet. It's new." She turned to leave, but glanced back. "Oh, and don't forget, we've got friends coming over this weekend. Try not to embarrass us, okay?" Her heels clicked away before I could answer. I picked up the mug, staring at the steam curling into the air. I sipped slowly, tasting bitterness that wasn't just the coffee, and I made a decision. For the next few days, I watched. I listened. I kept my head bowed, my voice soft, pretending to be the invisible burden they painted me as. I listened as Daniel complained on the phone about bills he couldn't cover. I heard Evelyn boasting to her friends about how we'll be inheriting soon enough. I saw the bank envelopes Daniel tried to hide under his coat when he came in, the ones Evelyn never noticed, too wrapped up in her own vanity. I began collecting. Quietly. Patiently. I took the envelopes from the trash where he thought shredding was enough. I found the unpaid bills shoved in drawers. I pulled the statements from the mailbox before Evelyn could touch them. Every piece painted a picture. Daniel was drowning in debt, borrowing money under my name, assuming I'd be gone before it caught up with him. But I wasn't gone, and I wasn't blind. By Friday, I had a folder thick with evidence, receipts, overdue notices, copies of accounts he had dipped into. I placed it carefully in my dresser drawer, locked it, and slipped the key onto a chain around my neck. Each paper was more than just proof of his lies. Each paper was leverage. That weekend, when their friends arrived, Evelyn paraded them through the house as if it were hers. "We've just redone the kitchen," she bragged, sweeping her hand across the countertops. "And soon, we'll be expanding the patio. Daniel's been working so hard to make this house perfect for us." I stood in the corner, hands folded, my smile polite. Not one of them knew the truth. That the house still belonged to me, that Daniel hadn't worked a day for it, that every word out of Evelyn's mouth was stitched together from my sacrifices. But they would, because humiliation has a way of rotting in silence, and I had carried mine long enough. That night, when the last guest left, Evelyn smirked at me as she collected the empty glasses. "See? Not so hard to just stay quiet in the background, is it? That's where you belong." I met her eyes for the first time in days, letting the silence stretch until her smirk faltered. "You've made a mistake," I whispered. "Both of you." She frowned, confused. Daniel walked in then, loosening his tie, half drunk and arrogant. "What's she babbling about now?" I looked at him, at the son I had raised, the boy I had once carried through sleepless nights, and I felt nothing but cold. "You think I'm almost gone?" I said softly. "But I've never been more present in your lives. And soon, you'll realize just how much of it I still hold in my hands." Neither of them understood then. But they would. The fire had been lit, and this time I wouldn't let it burn out until Daniel had lost everything he thought was untouchable. The storm broke on a Wednesday afternoon when Daniel and Evelyn returned home arguing in sharp, clipped voices. I was sitting in the armchair by the window, my knitting needles quiet in my lap, waiting. "I told you the payment went through," Daniel barked, slamming the door behind him. Evelyn's shrill reply cut through the house. "Then why did the bank call me? Why did they say the account was empty? Do you think I'm stupid?" I watched them unravel from my corner, their words bouncing off the walls, slicing each other apart. Daniel's face was red, his hands balled into fists. Evelyn's mascara had smudged, her perfect composure cracked. That was my cue. I rose slowly, letting my knees pop, and walked past them without a word. They didn't notice until I came back with the leather folder from my room, the one fat with receipts, bank statements, and proof. I laid it on the kitchen table and tapped it once with my hand. Both their heads turned. "What's this?" Daniel asked, his voice caught between defensiveness and dread. I sat, folding my hands neatly in front of me. "Everything you've hidden," I said calmly. "Every debt, every stolen dollar, every lie you thought would stay buried until I was gone." Evelyn snatched a handful of papers, her eyes darting across the words. Her face paled. "Daniel," she whispered, horror rising in her voice. "These are in your mother's name. You dragged her into this." He lunged for the folder, but I pulled it close, my hand surprisingly steady. "Don't," I warned, my eyes locking on his. "You put me in a dentist's chair and told the world I wasn't worth saving. You laughed that I was almost gone. Well, Daniel, I'm still here, and now everyone will know the truth." I slid a second envelope across the table. He hesitated before opening it. Inside were copies I had already delivered, to the bank, to the creditors, even to Evelyn's family, who had always thought him a respectable provider. Daniel's hands shook as he flipped through them, his face draining of all color. "You wouldn't," he rasped. "I already did." Silence fell heavy. Evelyn backed away from him, her eyes cold, her lips twisting into a sneer. "You told me we were secure. You told me this house, this life." She broke off, her voice trembling. "All this time you were stealing from your own mother?" The children stood in the hallway, wide-eyed, listening. I turned my gaze on them, not cruel, but firm. "Your father said I was almost gone, but look closely. Who's really disappearing now?" Daniel collapsed into the chair, his head in his hands. Evelyn stormed off, muttering curses, leaving him to drown in the silence he had created. I stood, gathering the folder and slipping it back under my arm. My voice was steady, sharp as glass. "You tried to erase me with your words, but I've taken back my name, and everything you thought you owned, your respect, your comfort, even your family's trust. It was never yours. It was mine to give, and now it's mine to take away." I walked to the door, my cardigan brushing against my sides, and paused only once to look back at him slumped over the table, broken. "At the dentist's office, you said, don't waste good treatment on her teeth. She's almost gone." My voice cut the air clean. "But you were wrong, Daniel. I wasn't the one who was almost gone. It was you. And now you have nothing left." And with that, I stepped out into the sunlight, leaving the house echoing with the hollow sound of his downfall. Please subscribe to our channel and tell us in comments from where are you watching this video.